Hello, everyone. Hello. We are waiting a few seconds as people are joining in. Welcome to the PEFC webinar. I will just take my time before starting to allow everyone to connect and settle their IT system. So, good morning. Welcome to the PEFC webinar for a webinar of creating impact through responsibly sourced packaging together. We have 50 minutes together just to explain the concept. Over the next 50 minutes, we'll have two sections. One will be a first 30 minutes where we will have speakers answering some specific questions that we most often get asked from market players. And the second part is to answer your questions. You will see on the bottom of your screen a Q&A button, which you can use to post your questions anonymously if you wish, or with your name if you wish. They will be seen by myself and a colleague, and we will take them straight after the first section. So we'll have 20 minutes at the end to answer your questions. Feel free to start asking them now. So before we start, I would like to start with a poll. And you will again be able to participate to this poll. You will find the question coming up on your screen. According to ProCarton survey, which was done in 2019, what percentage of consumers look for labels on packaging for information about the environmental status? And here you have the choice between 50%, 70%, or 90%. I give you a few moments to answer. So far we have 130, 150 people who have answered the question. Very good, thank you. There's quite a few of us on this webinar, so it's very good. We will have a very good sample. So I can now reveal a few more that are coming through. Okay. I can now reveal that the correct answer to this ProCarton study that was done. So you have voted on the 50%. I can now reveal that according to this ProCarton survey that was done in 2019, the correct answer is 90%. So it's a very high 90% of consumers who look for labels on packaging for information about the environmental consideration, the environmental status. Okay, then we will have a second poll in a moment. So now moving on to who is going to be addressing you today in the next 30 minutes. So we have Mr. Ben Goedeberg, who is CEO and Secretary General of PEFC International. Ben is a forester by education and training. He has gained experience in the forest before becoming one of the founders of what is today the world's largest forest certification system. Good morning, Ben. And we also have Michael Berger, COO and Head of Technical Unit. Michael was trained as an economist with a PhD in forestry, and was recently leading the revision of process of the PEFC international standard revision process. And myself, I'm Fabienne Sinclair, Head of Marketing, and I will be moderating this session. So again, for those who have just joined, people are still joining, which is very good. please feel free to ask your questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen as we go along. And we will take your questions at the end. We'll try to answer most of them. So here we will be going through stages of questions, as I said earlier on, that are very oftenly asked by some of the customers and stakeholders that we meet specifically from on the packaging industry. So whether suppliers, retailers, or brand owners. Starting with overall, we've really seen the attention to forests is increasing, whether it's through since the COP21 acknowledgement, also the report of the IPCC highlighting the benefits of forest, the vast public and private afforestation and reforestation programs that are taking on, and also the industry really going back to innovation using wood and wood fibers. So Ben, could you tell us a bit more about why has the interest in forests been increasing so much in the last few years?
Well, thank you, Fabienne. I think the first thing that we need to look at is some of the concerns that people have about forestry and that society has about forestry. You know, one of the biggest problems that we're still seeing is a lot of deforestation, and of course that has climate change impacts, which are quite important. And 80% of that deforestation actually happens because of agricultural expansion. Now, we've got growing populations, we've got increases in demand for food. But if you've just read The Economist from last week, you can see how even in the COVID period, when overall the carbon dioxide emissions have gone down in some parts of the world, like the Amazon, actually they have been increasing because people are clearing land much more fervently than ever before, clearing it first of all usually for cattle, and then afterwards for agricultural big crops like soya and so on. And the problem with that is that of course a lot of the land is worth 5 to 10 times more when it's been converted from forest land to other land, agricultural land. So we're seeing population growth, we're seeing governance issues such as illegal and unsustainable logging, and these are huge problems which concern us and for which society is concerned, because of course we're seeing changes in climate change. We've had the massive wildfires earlier this year, you know, in Australia, and then of course we also had the ones last year in Europe and in North America. So we're losing about 100 million hectares of forests a year to fires and pests and other natural disasters in forests, which we can of course impact on through management and the way that we tackle these particular issues. So those are all the negative things which definitely are the headline grabbers, and they bring people to ask the question, you know, what is the problem with forestry? But of course, people are not seeing the full value or the impact of forests, such as the capture and storage and the climate mitigation properties of forests themselves. And there we have quite a lot of really good news and stuff that we should focus on. We're aware of the fact that 75% of the bird species in the world are in and around forests, and nearly 70% of the mammals and 60% of vascular plants. And so of course, biodiversity is vitally important when you consider that forests only cover 1/3 of the land mass on this planet. And we need to make sure that through sustainable forest management, we maintain those areas and actually increase those areas and change the whole mindset, which is resulting in the deforestation, for example. Then of course, there are the bigger issues such as water and soils. And with water, as we know, 75% of the world's drinking water is filtered through forests. So forests are providing a very vitally important ecosystem service in terms of water, and also in terms of soil, in terms of protection of soils, and even in the creation of soils. And some 30% of the world's forests are actually managed particularly with water and soil conservation in mind. And that is indeed a very good thing that we should continue to encourage through supporting sustainable forest management as well. And in water, sometimes what people find amazing is that even mangroves are important for sustainability underwater. So, for example, they're good breeding grounds for shellfish and for fish themselves. Very, very important that we protect the water aspects as well. Now, moving on to communities. Of course, communities are very important. There are something like 1.6 billion people whose livelihoods are impacted directly or indirectly by forests. And then when we look at actually how communities are interacting with forests, we've got some 800 million people, most of them women, who are actually collecting firewood on a daily basis to ensure that cooking and heating of houses and dwellings can be maintained for some 2.4 billion people around the planet. And we've got about 1 billion people depending on and very much having significant proportion of their food coming from wild foods. And so forests are vitally important for local communities, but also because they are also some of the areas where some of the world's poorest of the poor live. There are some 252 million people living on less than $1.25 a day in the forests and savanna areas. And so there is much that we can do by promoting sustainable forest management to increase sustainable livelihoods and to support that. And we do that also, of course, through the packaging, the sustainable packaging, because by choosing sustainable packaging and by moving along sustainable packaging, we're moving away from oil-based resources, which are challenging and creating the carbon dioxide problems which we're having, and actually moving towards solutions which not only benefit society as a whole, but also benefit those local communities who are looking to have a sustainable livelihood overall. Some 38% of the carbon dioxide emissions that are produced by the fossil fuels and industry every year are actually absorbed and captured by the forests. And that's actually not very sustainable. We can't really change that by doubling the size of the forest area or something like that. We really need to start looking at how do we reduce fossil fuels and our dependence on fossil fuels and use wood-based solutions, for example, in packaging, which are climate smart solutions for society as a whole. Looking at the sustainable development goals, this is an area where you need to be aware of the fact that all of the forests are adding to all of the sustainable development goals. And we have things such as chain of custody, which you'll hear about later on, which create a level playing field, for example, for procurement and traceability, regardless of what the governance is in a particular country. And as I mentioned earlier on, one of the challenges to society is the lack of governance in areas where we know that over 80% of the world's forests are actually, owned and managed by governments themselves. So sustainable development goals such as number 7 on clean energy, or even well-being for people in forests, or cities using much more cross-laminated timber to build buildings which are better for insulation and so on, and more energy efficient. Everybody always thinks of 15, that's the one that they always associate with forestry, but of course it's all of them, including 17. And that's a very, very important one, because that's all about where forest certification, whether it's PEFC or FSC, comes into play, because we're talking about local empowerment, consensus-driven sustainable forest management solutions, recognizing, being recognized at a global level, these partnerships for promoting sustainable forest management. At the moment, some 2 billion people are joining the middle classes by 2030. Therefore, it is absolutely important that we meet the demands of people as far as the sustainable development goals are there. And even when you're talking just about your packaging, you remember that you are supporting a resource base which is supporting all of the sustainable development goals, and you should be proud of that, and you should be communicating that widely as well.
Okay, this is fascinating, Ben. So addressing our listeners today, who will be experts in the packaging industry, either as producers of packaging products or users of packaging products.
Yeah.
How can our listeners, how can companies be part of the solution in addressing, in protecting forest?
Well, I mean, the companies have a really important part to play, as has also been recognized by the State of the World's Forest report, which was just recently published. Sustainable sourcing and responsible sourcing is one of the key areas, and that helps to create a new, I would say, post-COVID, hopefully much more post-COVID, level playing field that encourages all the benefits and the value add of forests to be demanded and provided by society. That's where we can make the differences, because that's an equalizer where all forests are concerned, regardless of where they are. Of course, you're also reducing shareholder risk by increasing your transparency and your sources. So not only should you get chain of custody yourself, but you should also ensure that all of your suppliers are getting certified as well. And of course, you're working on not just only reducing shareholder risk, but also protecting your natural capital, and actually, very importantly, adding further value to your brand, which is very important, because now people are very conscious of pandemics. And the next pandemic, the pandemic that we're dealing with at the moment, not only COVID, is also the climate change pandemic, which we need to deal with. We need to get that balance of biodiversity and production absolutely right. So, we are in a situation now that you can actually do quite a lot as companies in communicating to your customers. You saw yourself in the earlier poll how many people would like you to communicate it. I was surprised to see how low the figure was that we all polled here. So there's a lesson for all of us. We've got a lot more to do, and we should be making use of those opportunities for companies as a whole.
Okay. So moving on, forestry, as you've explained, is a complex domain, which is on the other hand, PEFC's expertise is pretty much our DNA. Where is PEFC's global situation at today?
Well, if we just look purely just at some of the statistics, we've got 325 million hectares of certified forests, and just over 1 million people who are actually impacted by that certification, with lots of national forest certification systems which are endorsed internationally and which meet the international benchmarks, and in some cases go beyond them. And then, of course, there are a lot of companies that are actually certified themselves. I think the number is still a little bit too low. There's much to be done, but there's quite a lot that we can do in terms of making and building on this progress as people become much more aware of their own personal impacts on society and on forests, which they can also make through their labeling choices. So you can see from this slide here that we're in the major areas. The dark green is countries where you can already source PEFC certified material. They are the most forested areas apart from Africa, but you can see even in Africa, the dark green, there are some certification systems already available. Light green means that they're moving towards the developing systems, and of course yellow as well. So that continues to grow, but 62% of the global certified forests in the world are PEFC certified.
Okay, so again, we often associate forests with environmental issues, yet much of forest well-being and longevity is also dependent on and heavily linked with social issues. And again, this is something that very much companies acknowledge, especially in the food sector, but overall acknowledge very well. So how is PEFC supporting local communities and smallholders then?
Well, local communities and smallholders, I mean, they're very, very important. And although some 25% of the world's forests are managed by hundreds of millions of people, who are also customers, by the way, they are making very clearly the connection between the kind of landscape that we want to see maintained and an increasingly urban population. We're now half the world's population living in forests. It's going to go up to 3/4 of the world's population by 2050. So we need to ensure that forest communities, actually smallholders, have a voice as the guardians and the people who safeguard the environment that we so much love. You know, we were concerned in the early days that forest certification was only going to be available for, you know, the big boys, the big actors. And so we went out of our way to create an opportunity for smallholders of any size to get involved in group certification. And the key important thing is to get all of those people and the local communities involved in national standard setting, the development and the evolution of it, so they feel ownership of it, as well as at global level. Another area that we've been very focused on is the aspects of forest workers' protection. It's absolutely crucial that we have that not only in the forests themselves, but also along the supply chain, whether it be the ILO core conventions, you know, or even trying to ensure that you have not only the legal incomes that forest workers can earn, but actually the living wage. And we encourage all certification systems to set timetables to move towards everybody being on a living wage, whether they are migrant workers or resident workers, local workers, and so on. So it's very, very important that we bring equality and fairness and protection to the forest place, considering that the forestry profession, not many people know this, but it's the second most dangerous profession after active service in the military. So people who are involved in war zones, and then thereafter you find forestry workers. So we really have to make an effort to get them more involved and get them better protected in the forest environments in which they work with, as well as throughout the supply chain as well. Then, of course, there are the areas that we still have governance issues around the world, including the something 360 million indigenous peoples who live in and around forests. And it's absolutely crucial that they are involved through our processes of free, prior and informed consent. But then one area which we're very proud of, which we have developed recently, is the innovation. And innovation is so much required, particularly post-COVID. And one of the things is that there are a lot of forests outside, lots of trees outside forests. And if you look at agricultural land alone, if you were to use the FAO definition, you could say that 40% of the agricultural land could potentially be classified as forested area or treed area. And that's very, very important because, again, the State of the World's Forests has identified that agroforestry solutions are so important to ensure soil protection, increased productivity of agriculture, and at the same time providing the wood and the biodiversity and the fuels that we need to keep rural societies and also urban societies going. So that is very, very important. Of course, remember also that trees outside forests can also cover that communication link, very important communication link between urban people and rural people, the communities there. So if you actually already have the beautifully labeled packaging with a PEFC label, but people then actually also see the urban forestry with the label as well, they can make that connection much better. And together we can communicate the importance of forests and their values to society as a whole. So that's a very important area where we really need the help of the packaging sector to increase that and to answer society's demand.
All right, thank you, Ben. It really illustrates the breadth in terms of the breadth of certification on the subject of environmental, but also on subject of small holders and local communities. So we're moving now to our second poll of this webinar. Again, you'll be able to participate to the question that is a question from this time, a survey published this year, very recent, from two sides. What percentage of consumers prefer paper and cardboard packaging for environmental reasons? So a study conducted by the organization Two Sides, which promotes paper and packaging. And slowly we're going to see the numbers coming through. And I take this opportunity to remember people who just arrived that you can use the Q&A button to pose your questions, which we will answer in the later part of this webinar. Okay, so I think the poll is now complete. And right, and you are correct. So on this occasion, the answer is 63% of consumers prefer paper and packaging for environmental reasons. Thank you. So now moving on to you, Michael, for some more technical expertise of our standards. What makes PEFC sustainable forest management approach unique?
Well, that's actually one of the key questions for PEFC. And there are two main aspects, an aspect concerning the governance of the system, and of course, on the other hand, the content part. So for the governance, the most important criterion for PEFC is our so-called bottom-up approach. That means we need so-called national governing bodies, national members, regional members to implement the international requirements in the regional context. So this gives very much strength to the system on the local level. It needs also the local level. So without the people in the regions, in the countries, PEFC will not really be there. But through this multi-stakeholder engagement on this level, you also get the acceptance at the end of the day for the products, for the label, for the marketing, so that the people are engaged with this initiative. The other part concerning the content, of course, what is characteristic for sustainable forest management, it's PEFC multi-purpose forestry. That means it's an old principle of sustainable forest management, and it actually says, or it aims on achieving different elements on the same area. So recreation, timber harvesting, and other things. You see here a very fascinating picture, even with honey produced in the forest. So also an aspect that is important, that people take different elements from the forest. The continuous improvement and dialogue, PEFC is oftentimes criticized traditionally since 20 years, and that helped PEFC to develop a unique form of a dialogue, how to discuss, how to engage with stakeholders, how to give stakeholders a voice to be able to participate in the process.
Thank you, Michal. So another question we often get asked by companies, because we have 47 endorsed members all over the globe, how do we ensure that our members meet the 250 sustainable forest management requirements that are in our core benchmark?
That's something where we say in our technical unit, we call this sometimes the royal process, because it's the key process behind this that describes the character of PEFC from the beginning, from the founding idea. We have the international benchmark, that means the sustainable forest management requirements on the international level, and our national systems, the members on the regional level, have to implement those requirements in their context, in their standards. So they can consider national legislation, national governance systems, all those regional aspects which are relevant for having a sustainable forest management on the ground. PEFC has established an assessment process with international independent consultants who are doing that. This process actually is checking whether the standards on the national level, on the regional level, still meet the expectations, meet the objectives meet the purpose of the international requirements. And so PEFC is proud on this process, and fortunately we get even external confirmation, in external evidence that this process works. Maybe some of you know the TPEC organization. It's a Dutch governmental organization that is assessing timber certification systems, and it's one of the, even if the Netherlands are, it's always a question why such a small country like the Netherlands is so important, but it's the traditional key assessment of forest certification systems, and they confirm by assessing individual standards under the PEFC umbrella that they still comply with the national standards. So that's perfect national evidence for us. An example for the process is, or a part of the process is, when you look, for example, at our standard setting procedures, we have specific requirements how to develop a national standard, and all 47 countries have to follow exactly the same procedures, have to establish the same dialogue with the stakeholders on their level to implement the international requirements. Another example for the sophistication of this process is when you look at the different timelines. So it's a key element of the process that PEFC International defines specific milestones. It's almost a kind of controlling, a kind of monitoring system, since we are permanently assessing the process on the national level. Where are they with their national standard? After 5 years, they have to start a review. If the results of this review have a specific meaning, then they have to start a revision. And this is monitored by the PEFC International Secretariat and supports the implementation of the requirements.
Thank you, Michel. Last year, the United Nations IPBES report gave an alarming warning about the loss of biodiversity around the planet. So how is biodiversity managed in a PEFC certified forest?
Well, of course, biodiversity is one of the key elements in the PEFC standards. The PEFC, and it's just one example how to manage and how to focus on specific aspects of biodiversity. There are lots of other requirements. A core requirement of the PEFC International Standard and of the 47 national standards is the protection, conservation, or setting aside of the ecologically important forest areas. It's one of the key elements of the PEFC standard, how to deal with biodiversity, how to deal with ecologically important areas. And you know, PEFC is oftentimes criticized for not implementing the so-called high conservation value forest approach. This ecologically important forest area perspective, from PEFC's perspective, is very smart, since we actually integrate the biodiversity management in the traditional original management cycle of a certified entity. We do not establish a separate cycle that is requesting additional requirements or requesting additional resources. It's integrated in the daily management of the forest unit. And that's specifically now in the time when the European Commission is discussing biodiversity strategy. It's an important part for PEFC to educate stakeholders, to explain that our multi-purpose forestry that I mentioned a few minutes ago does still integrate the concept of protection, conservation, or even setting aside of areas as important part.
Okay, so we've spoken a lot about the SFM benefits. Let's move on. Let's move to the chain of custody standard, because of course all the brilliant work that is happening in the management of the forest has to benefit the market and ultimately the consumers. So what are the key elements in the 2020 chain of custody standard, Michel?
Yeah, the 2020 standard, as you maybe know, it was approved in January by the PEFC General Assembly. So there are actually, I say there are two groups of main changes. The key element from my perspective, because that's something where the PEFC Board of Directors, but even we in the Secretariat, we are strongly involved in promoting and bringing forward the idea and developing the conceptual system how to do it, is the integration of further sustainability, of basic sustainability requirement in the controlled sources definition. It means the requirements for the non-certified material that can be mixed in the supply chain, that can be mixed, for example, in the pulp production, are significantly further developed compared to the 2013 version. So for example, what you just have seen a few minutes ago, the definition of ecologically important forest areas, even non-certified material needs to comply with those requirements. And you cannot just destroy such an ecologically important forest area and mix it then with the material into a supply chain with PEFC certified material. So that's one big item. The other big thing is that we have lots of small technical adjustments, or maybe just at the first sight, small adjustments. One thing that is specifically for the pulp sector, I guess, very interesting, or we know it since we had requests since years for that. And the first pilot project that PEFC has done in this area was together with a pulp company in Europe, this cross-site product group option. Since in the pulp sector, lots of pulp mills are still sourcing regionally. So if there is no certified material around the company around the site, they are easily in trouble. So this cross-site product group option allows to more or less swap certified credits within different sites. So when you are in Spain, for example, in a region where you have no certified material, you can transfer in a credit volume system the credits to another site. And of course, from a short-term sustainability perspective, this has critical elements, of course, but in the long run, we still think that the chain of custody is used much more efficiently with that, and will give us a very strong pull effect on forestry in the long run.
Okay. So the last question has actually been quite asked a few times here. I've been checking also the questions we are getting through from the audience. PEFC label usage, how to be compliant. Now we know it's quite complex overall, so we'll just give a very top line overview, but how to be compliant, Michel?
Yeah, so it's, as you already said, Fabienne, it's a complex issue, although it's not directly linked to the material stream, but it's of course one of the key elements, because without these labels, you are not able to communicate that the material is originating from sustainably managed forests. So it's a key element. And I always say, and I make it very clear for the audience, PEFC is happy to answer any questions that you need to use a label in your processes or for your products. So, and actually it's the basics is very simple. Every actor needs a trademark contract to obtain a license with a license number to use the PEFC logo and the initials. So that's very simple for all actors, the same. And if you have such a contract, you have an access to the PEFC label generator. The new one, which is relevant for the 2020 standard, is a fascinating tool. You can use it in an easy way with lots of features, and it will strongly support PEFC and of course also the certified companies to reduce misuse, so that we have a further tool and an element to strengthen the brand, to strengthen the communication of the sustainable origin of the material.
Thank you, Michel, for a quick overview of some of these very technical elements. So moving on, before we move to answering your questions, and they are coming through, thank you. So overall, really, what are the certification benefits for you overall? So it's to give you reassurance that by using certified material, using certified packaging and paper, you are doing the right thing. You are supporting sustainably managed forest. And of course, you meet legality as really across our standard, legality is a minimum prerequisite, and the sustainability is way additional expectations. And you, of course, meet also private and public sectors requirements, as well as customers' expectation, whether they're your supply chain customers or whether they are ultimately the consumer. You ensure traceability for your wood-based material. And through the PEFC system, you access the largest source of certified supply. And finally, but very importantly, it's to be aligned with what we collectively have to do together to meet the UN Sustainable Development Goals and all your own companies, your own sustainability targets that you have. So overall, moving on, is that together we are part of the solution for a healthier planet, whether it's sourcing certified fibers, or for us, the role of giving you access to the certified fibers, through your own sustainable innovation. And we see a lot of sustainable innovation in the packaging industry. And also the benefit of circular economy. And again, wood-based material is brilliant to meet some of this circularity objective. And also the importance of supporting large reforestation and afforestation actions to, in the future, become certified and feed into the supply chain of certified materials. So moving on to the questions, there's quite a few questions. So I'm going to select those that are coming back, let's say, I would say most recurrently. So I'm, okay, they are, okay. I'm a food supplier. So sorry, I'm a food retailer. Do I need to be certified to be using the PEFC logo? So maybe, Michael, if you could answer this one. And unmute yourself, please.
I was in the middle of studying the questions and I didn't listen to your question. If you can repeat it.
That's for sure. So a few questions around the use of the label. One specifically being a food retailer. Does the retailer has to be certified to be using the PEFC label?
No, that's and sorry for not listening, because it's a very easy answer. The retailer does not need to be certified. The retailer, if he wants to use a own label, it's necessary to have this logo license contract, but without any certification. It's just to keep the label under control, but no certification necessary.
Okay. Thank you, Michel. Maybe one for Ben. So there is a national legislation regarding forest protection and recovery. Sorry, I don't know who this person from, but so there is a national legislation regarding forest protection and recovery. What are the additional requirements of PEFC certification?
Oh gosh, many more. I mean, we have you know, over 200 requirements for what a sustainable forest management standard should have. I mean, legality doesn't give you assurances of sustainable forest management, and you know, we need to. That's why we have voluntary systems which go way over and above that. So there's a lot more to require, and I think Michael covered some of them in his presentation.
Okay. So let me again go back to some of the most often asked questions. There's quite a few on logo, on label, and so we will do a specific session on the use of logo and trademark. I think this will be a question. Is there a PEFC guidance documents for compliance with the EUTR, such as FSC has produced, is one of the questions.
We don't have a specific guidance document. We just say if you properly implement the standard and if you are certified, actually the standard ensures that you are compliant with the European timber regulation. We are working on a document explaining the parallels and to make it more transparent for the user, how the requirements of the EUTR, how to find them in the standard if somebody specifically wants to know them, but no specific guidance document except that.
Okay. A question on DDS. Could you explain more briefly about new requirement for the DDS for own verification?
Not exactly sure what the question means. So the due diligence system has some new requirements. The existing, The due diligence system as such has still the same principles. You have to gather information. There are some exemptions. You have to do a risk assessment. You have to do some mitigation. And you have to make a decision whether you can place the timber on the market or not. That's still exactly the same like in the 2013 standard. It's just an additional element concerning the risk assessment. We further developed the criteria which are relevant for the non-certified material under specific conditions. That means, for example, what I mentioned, the ecologically important forest area, there needs to be a risk assessment under specific conditions, whether non-certified material potentially originates from an ecologically important forest area or not. And the national governing bodies, that means the national systems, are currently working on tools to support the companies, the user of the companies who buy the material on the national, on the regional level, so that it should not be too difficult. Very important, and I still want to highlight that PEFC is following the principle that the organization, the certified entity at the end of the day is responsible for the decision whether they comply with the risk assessment procedures or not. PEFC, neither PEFC International nor our PEFC national governing body takes this decision in kind of a geographical risk assessment. That's a clear difference to the FSC approach, in case you compare it to that.
Yeah. Thank you, Michelle. So we can take a few more. I'm just keeping an eye on the time as well. A question on, well, there's a few questions about asking about the difference between PEFC and FSC. But I guess the main one comes back to why should we use both systems as an end user, so as a retailer or brand owner? Why should we have both PEFC and FSC and our colleagues FSC in our procurement policies? Ben, would you like to take on that one?
Yes, of course. Now, you know, it is absolutely crucial for people to understand that there are actually more than just 2 certification systems in the world. PEFC covers 47 national forest certification systems, which are being pulled together into one umbrella, which makes life a bit easier when one then has a procurement policy which just specifies PEFC and or FSC. So that is quite an important point to make. The certification systems, both PEFC and FSC, when one looks at the latest Dutch public procurement policies, you can see that we're both A-star students. So we're the best of the best. They're fantastic certification systems, and you should be using them and supporting them. Collectively, they're still only responsible for about 30% of the world's timber production, and we've got a lot more work to do. There's an awful lot of overlap. 50% of the nearly 50% of the FSC area is also PEFC certified. So you're really seeing a lot of overlap in a lot of areas. We worked together on some areas just recently, even on the COVID auditing requirements. We tried to make sure that we had harmonization there to make life easier for the auditors. But so if people are looking at certification, they're both good. You should take them both. You should include them in your inclusive policies, and you should try and get as much of both of the certification systems as you can, so we can get more areas certified.
Okay, thank you very much, Ben. There was actually questions, as you mentioned, COVID. There was a couple of questions about how COVID is impacting one forest, and the second part is the supply chain. So maybe from an audit perspective, so Ben or Michal, who would like to take on this question regarding COVID impact on forest supply chain?
Yeah, I can take that one on, because we've been doing survey of members and so on. So of course, in some countries, it really depends where you are. If you are an exporter country, you've been impacted quite severely because countries have stopped importing certified material. But of course, that has now changed. So for example, in New Zealand, many people were not able to export materials, particularly to China. That's one of their largest customer bases. But now, you know, the material is flying off the docks like hotcakes. They're really, really popular. And many people are saying, look, the first wave of COVID, actually the forestry sector actually did quite well. In some countries, actually, the forestry sectors were being rewarded if they were actually also certified. So we've seen an increase, not only in the area, but also in the numbers of chain of custodies. And the major companies, you know, when they've been producing the huge demand for toilet paper, which you'll all remember, but also for masks and so on. So there's an awful lot of increases in some areas, but other areas, for example, with furniture and so on, there's a decrease. And a lot of that had to do with also because the furniture shops were shut. So it really depends on which part of the world is there. But actually, forestry has got off pretty lightly compared to a lot of other sectors as far as the impacts of COVID are concerned. So we're optimistic. We're concerned about a second wave, of course, and we're monitoring the situation very closely to see which of our member countries need support and which sectors need more support from us. And so that we can really increase that demand and make sure that we start dealing with the bigger problems, the climate change problems, when we get past COVID.
Okay, and one last question before we close, relating environmental NGOs. So are environmental NGOs involved in PEFC's standard development and PEFC's running overall?
Yeah. Absolutely, I wouldn't answer that one. I feel very, very passionately about it. You know, it's very, very important that we have multi-stakeholders involved in it. And we did a survey of only 14 of our 47 members, and we had over 104 NGOs in there supporting PEFC members at national level, and those NGOs represented some 11 million people and 27,000 organizations. So we're very much locally based, locally involvement, local ownership, and the NGOs involved in that getting involved. That's absolutely crucial. That's the way we do things. You know, we need this dialogue. We need to have people more involved in getting consensus and getting understanding and how we move forward. So we're very proud of our record on that. And we are very sure that as we grow and into more areas, the involvement of NGOs, as indeed every other stakeholder group, will increase.
Okay. Thank you very much, both Ben and Michel. We have 67 questions, so it's a lot. What we invite you in doing, because we promise we'll have 50 minutes and we don't want to take over your time, but please follow us on all the various social media that you can see: Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Instagram. Visit our website. You will find all of us on the website. So if you want technical questions or more labor questions, you can come to us. You can contact me and I will dispatch the questions appropriately to my colleagues who are experts in their own fields. And also, and very importantly, you can find and check who are your national members, whether you are based in India, in France, in America, and so on and so forth. Do check this link to find out who the PEFC endorsed national member is in your country. Thank you very much. We will be running a few more of these webinars after the summer, again on specific topics. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Bye. Thank you.